What is going on, and welcome back into the Behind the Cage Door podcast. I am your host, as always, Jake Littman, and today I'm very excited to bring to you episode 19 of the podcast with Bobby Wombacher. But before we start, a quick little intro. Make sure you go check out all my social media. Stuff is going to be down below. Give us a quick follow, give this video a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and make sure you give Bobby a check out on social media. He's very active. He posts quotes and all sorts of good stuff. So definitely go and check him out. Now, before we get into the episode, a quick word from our sponsored nitric oxide cold plasma water. This stuff is what you need. I just drank one right before we started filming this episode. After a long day of work, I needed a little clean energy boost before walking the dog, doing this interview, and then going to the gym. And cold plasma water is the perfect product for that. Not only is this beautiful lemon original flavor, they have some new products. So go to the website, link will be below, and use my promo code JAKE15 for 15% off. But even better, the parent company, Good State Health Solutions, has some awesome products like this Ionic Man nutrient supplement. You know, that parent company does a lot of really awesome things, but all they need is a hair sample, and they will tell you your nutrient deficiencies and build you a custom formula to fill in those deficiencies. So go check out the link down below. That promo code J15 should be up above the entire episode, so go check it out. It helps support the channel. But without further ado, let's get right into the episode. Thank you for watching. Welcome back into the Behind the Cage Door podcast. I am here with the man, Ref Bobby Wombacher. How we doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic. And yourself?
Oh man, it's a great day. I'm so happy that we finally were able to get this on the calendar and get this out for the world to hear. I mean, I'm excited to talk to you, man. I've got a lot of questions. So thank you so much for making the time to come on today.
Absolutely. We've been going back and forth for a good bit. So I'm glad we could make it happen.
It feels like I've known you forever, man. But today on episode 19 of the podcast, we have Bobby here, and there's a lot of awesome questions that we're going to ask him. But I feel like what I have to ask to start as a fan is UFC 295s this weekend. And this isn't a predictions channel, but Alex Potan Pereira is probably my favorite fighter. He's fighting Yuri Prochazka in the main event for the light heavyweight title. Real quick, what do you think about that fight? You got any predictions?
Well, I can't really make a prediction for conflict of interest purposes, but I think it's an interesting fight. I think Alex has taken on the top competition since he's been there. And I think Yuri's, I think that is going to be a hell of a fight. And quite honestly, I'm glad that it's the main event, not the co-main event. Had I been the UFC, I would have moved it off of the John Jones card to be a main event on its own, because it is that good of a fight. So yeah, I think the people in Madison Square Garden are in for a hell of a main event.
Oh yeah, for sure. The energy is going to be unreal there, and I appreciate you staying strong. I try to get a fast one in on you, but I mean, and let's really, I really want to talk about that real quick. Like when John Jones was on the card, those tickets were at minimum $1,000. And that fight falls off the card, and surprisingly, the price value drops so low that I almost decided to go myself. So I find it crazy that people are sleeping on this main event because it's an unreal fight, and stylistically, it's great. And what it did is, at the loss of John Jones, it brought on Sergey Pavlovich versus Tom Aspinall. So we see a fight with two fights with big guys. I mean, really big guys throwing down in the small octagon. So my first question for you, off the prediction topic. What's it like, man, when you're in that octagon? You're the third guy. You're behind the cage door with two men or women, and they're fighting with everything on the line. What's it like, especially with those big guys going at it? What's it like being the third guy in there?
It's like jumping out of an airplane. The adrenaline rush is unbelievable. When that cage door closes, the reality is it's me and two other people, whether men or women, and I'm the only one in there that can stop them. So obviously I have to be trained and ready to do my job, but the adrenaline rush is unmatchable. And I scuba dive and I do all that stuff there's nothing compared to when I say let's get after it. And yeah, there's it's the most intense feeling I've ever had.
And you know what? I feel like that thrill seeker in you loves that every fight, and I feel like it only gets better. That appetite keeps getting stronger every fight that you're in there with them. And so for you, I mean, do you have any preferences on what you're doing as a ref? Like for you, do you prefer to be in there with smaller fighters, bigger fighters in certain places? Like how do you as a ref decide what your style is and how you're going to be able to control the environment around you?
So for me, it doesn't matter if I'm in there with little, flyweights or heavyweights. It doesn't matter if it's male or female. But the reality is, when you look at the card and your assignments, that if it's the lighter weight classes, you're going to get a workout because they move a lot more around the cage. Um, you know, historically, not all the time, but historically, the women fights typically are bangers. Like they're just going to go in there and they're going to they just try to tear each other's heads off. Then you got the heavyweights where for the most part, it's either going to be a very intense slugfest in the beginning. And if the fight doesn't end, then they tire out and it becomes more of a slow paced fight. And not always, just historically. So for me, when I look at the card, that's the first thing I look at is weight classes because I got to mentally be prepared. Like, am I going in for a marathon or am I going in for a sprint? What are we doing tonight? And but I love it, man. I love being in there with the littler guys. I love being in there with the heavyweights. I did a fight in Wyoming. It was for a local show, and this is 7 years ago, maybe. And the two guys, it was a super heavyweight fight, so they were over 265, and they were both 6'10".
My God.
So, like, I looked like I was tiny comparative to them. So that one was a little nerve wracking because the reality is if they're swinging punches, I've got to stop it. And I got to be willing to take one to protect the fighter because that's my job. And so the reality when you think about that is, man, this could hurt. So
When you say that to me, like it almost sounds like you're a Secret Service agent, which is
no,
crazy.
yeah, the job is you got to protect a fighter. That's my only job is to protect both fighters that are in there. And if that means that they're getting hit and I go in to stop it, I'm going to take shots. Like I've been hit hundreds of times. I've broke my thumb. I've been kicked in the face. I've been punched. Like it just happens. And people say, oh, that was wrong. They shouldn't do that. No, their mindset is they're in a fight and they're doing what they're supposed to do. I'm interjecting in that. And yeah, so yeah, they know I'm going to, but yeah, in the heat of the moment, I take no offense to it, and it is what it is. Unless they look at me because they're upset at the call and then they hit me, then we got a problem. But if it's in the flow of the action, it's all fair.
And I feel like you need that mindset. And there's a lot that I want to talk about with your experiences. And I think very shortly we'll talk about your training. But how'd you even get here, man? How'd you become an MMA referee?
Well, so just like everybody, I started watching it on the VHS tapes back in the 94, I believe. And you look at it and you're like, oh, I can do that and blah, blah, blah. And then it went through the phase. I graduated, went to college, got married. And so back then the UFC events were maybe every 3 or 4 months. Like it was an event. So you would invite all your family over, your friends over, you would barbecue, and like it was an evening together. Now they're every weekend. So people are the newer fans have no idea what it was like, to get everybody together and have 50 to 100 people at your house and everybody's amped up because you've been looking forward to the fight for 3 months. And so watched it, did all that stuff. And along my travels, I got moved to Hollywood, California for a bit. And on my windshield one day, there was a flyer for Herb Dean referee course. And being a fan at that point, I was like, man, that's pretty cool. I got something from Herb Dean, yada, yada. So I was kept it. And then my travels took me to Salt Lake City, and I had an opportunity to train at Jeremy Horn's gym. And so I'm a big Pat Miletich camp fan, and my favorite fighter is Matt Hughes because he and I grew up about 20 miles from each other, and he's only a couple years older than me. So I had an admiration for that camp. And so I had an opportunity to train at Jeremy Horn's gym. And anybody who knows anything about the sport knows who Jeremy Horn is. Like that isn't an icon. And so the intent was to fight, and I was all excited. And then I had an injury on my left shoulder blade, and it was going to take me out of the action for 6 months. And I was like, damn, I just got into it. Like, what am I going to do to stay involved? Like, man. And I remembered I had the flyer from Herb Dean. So I went to it. I went and signed up for his next class, and it was super expensive. Flew out to Pasadena. I believe it was Pasadena. I don't even remember now. I think it was Pasadena, and failed. And I was like, Jesus. So I flew back home, went back in, sat down with Jeremy, and I don't know how long you've been watching or whatever, but do you remember DeMarcus Johnson?
I'm
Okay, so
not. I'm a newer fan. I have to admit that.
he fought on the Ultimate Fighter, and he fought in the UFC mini fights, and he trained with Jeremy Horn. And so Jeremy had him help me, and we just did one-on-ones to get the things that I missed, because I knew all the rules, but the thing that you don't prepare for or don't understand, and everybody says, oh, I can be a ref, is you got to be able to number one, you got to be able to apply every hold that a fighter can do. So if you can't do it, you can't effectively be in there. But more importantly, not only do you have to be able to apply it, you have to know how to disassemble it. Because if a fighter has their arm in a Kimura and you don't know where the pressure point is, which is the shoulder, if you don't know that and you're trying to relieve the elbow or whatever, you're going to do more damage to the shoulder. So that's where I failed, is I didn't know all the pressure points and where, when you go in to stop a fight, you got to be in a good position, but you got to know where to put your hands. It doesn't look like that to the normal fan, but the high level referees, if you watch them, and I watch the UFCs more to watch referees than I do the fighters, because the high level ones is the ones you want to learn from. And I want people to learn from me too. So I got to know where to apply the pressures and all that. So went back past it, realized that I was really good at it and didn't have to get punched in the face every day. So 12 and a half years later, I'm still doing it.
That's awesome. And it's crazy how things really come full circle, man. Like, who knew that flyer would come back around and be so valuable?
Yeah, I mean, I kept it because, Herb Dean was someone I looked up to, back then. I'm like, man, that's cool. I got, Herb Dean's flyer. And came back, and then he's the one who trained me and ended up doing my first class with. So, yeah.
I mean, that's awesome. And Herb Dean, obviously, everybody knows who Herb Dean is. He's a legend in the sport in his own right. And so for you, I mean, you mentioned that class, but what really is referee training?
So it's usually 2 days. The first day is going to be more of your rules stuff, breaking down, all the rules, what they mean, how to interpret them. Because the reality is you've got to be the smartest guy in the room when you're there. You have to. If somebody else knows the rules better than you, you should not step into that cage, because the fighters are trusting. They're literally putting their trust that you know what you're doing so they can do what they're supposed to do. If they're concerned that, oh, I got Jake tonight, got it. His last one, man, now the fighter's not focused on their fight. They're focused on who in the hell's the ref, and now they're going to go in there and probably get knocked out. So it's important. And you want fighters to say, oh, man, I got Jake as my ref. Man, I know I'm in good shape tonight. Win, lose, or draw, they got to know they can trust you. So number one, you've got to know the rules inside and out, frontward, backwards, every way, which way. And, the commission, the fighters, the coaches, none of them can know the rules better than you. So that was the first part. And then the second day is actually the application, where it's a lot of physical stuff, a lot of running to make sure that you can, you're in shape, number one. But then, going through stations. Okay. Got to do a Kimura. Okay. Do it here. Okay, what's this move? And you got to be able to identify, and then you got to be able to apply, and then you got to be able to say why you're doing what you're doing. So it's not just doing a Kimura. You got to say, why am I doing it? Where's the pressure points? And how do I know it's going to be successful, or whatever it looks like? And then same thing with chokes. How do you break up a choke? What chokes are more dangerous than others? How do you tell if somebody's out? So a full day of just going through the practical stuff, hands-on, getting in a cage, doing, your trainings. So that's what the training is. And then typically you got to do a refresher every year, or every two at the extreme, but usually every year for most of the commissions. And that's important because, again, the fighters deserve the best officials, whether an amateur fighter or a professional fighter. Like, they deserve the best, and they deserve people that are competent. They don't need to get in there with people who don't know what they're doing. They, oh man, I seen it on TV, I know I can rep. You don't know that. Like, until you get in there, you don't know that. But what have you done? What's your background? What classes have you done? So there's a lot of things, and my job is to keep a fighter safe. But if I don't know the rules and I don't know what I'm doing in there, I very well can't do that.
Absolutely. And I feel like that refresher course and, staying up to date is important because there's rule changes all the times, and different commissions in different states have different rules. So, and then you talk about the physical thing, like you mentioned earlier, the flyweights, they fight fast. And so you need to be able to be agile and in shape enough to stay focused and be in the right position. So how do you really find that?
On top of that, not only you've got to watch them and you got to see tendencies. You got to be able to pick up tendencies, because if they go to the right, you don't want to be caught on the right and get caught against a cage or in the middle. So you got to be watching them and you watching what they're doing. And, you got to know when their hips are in a certain way, which way are they going to roll? Is it going to be left or the right? And you want to be on the opposite side if at all possible, because now it doesn't always work out, but you don't want to be involved in the fight where you physically they roll into you, or, because then you're interfering and you disrupt the flow, and it happens, but you want it to happen very minimally.
100%. And you can't control everything, but the more that the fight can be focused on the fight, the better the fight's going to end up being. So I can only imagine how difficult it is to find that balance in any given fight, because every second something's happening and something changing. So for you, I feel like you're seeing so many different things happen at once, and these fighters, their lives are literally in your hands, and so it's a big burden, that's a big responsibility. So you talked about training before and how important it is really to know everything, not just to know the move, but to almost be the coach, be the teacher of the move. You need to see the pressure points and stuff. So do you still actively train to this day? And to you, how important? We already know how important it is, but for you, the training aspect, how much does that need to be a part of a referee's daily life?
I think every ref needs to train. I've heard the old saying, everybody says, oh, you need to be an ex-fighter to be a ref or a judge. That is crazy. Because if you look in any organization, your best worker isn't always the best manager. So just because they were a good fighter doesn't mean they'd be a good ref or judge. So when people say that, it just blows my mind. But I think every referee should know what's going on in there. They should have been in some sort of fight at some point, and they absolutely should be training at some level. It doesn't have to be at a black belt level, but you got to know, because new things come up. In the last couple of years, the choke that came up is that buggy choke. If you didn't know what that is and what you're looking at, like, you're going to be lost in there. And that isn't something that the UFC or somebody puts out a video, says, oh, a new choke out. No, you got to know it. Like, that's your job, is to know that stuff. So, you got to stay up to it. So it's very important that you, one, know what you're doing. Again, as I told you earlier, the confidence of the fighters is the most important thing. And if you get in there and you separate two fighters that are actively in a submission hold because you don't know what in the hell's going on, like, one, obviously you're probably not going to ref again there, but word gets around, and things happen, and people don't want you in there, and that's not what you want.
And clearly you've been doing the right things. I mean, it's clear that you take it very seriously and that it's very important to you. But on top of that, you have been in all the promotions. I mean, just to name a few, Bellator, LFA, and Victa, CFFC. I mean, you've really been around. We were talking before we started with all this. You've been doing bare knuckle stuff. So for you, I mean, and I'm sure you're certified by a multitude of commissions. So for
30.
you, oh my, 30.
Yep.
Oh my God. So I really like, how difficult is that? How difficult is it to, because each of these promotions have different rules, each of these states have different rules. So how do you stay up to date with different promotions and 30 different commissions?
So for the most part, the rules are the same. So your pro rules are almost 99.999% the same wherever you go. Where you get the variations are the amateur rules, because, states legislation and whatever it is, politics wise, they don't approve this, they don't do that. So that is challenging, and it's challenging for fighters. And I've been a big proponent of, we should have standardized rules even for amateurs, because if you have a fighter, let's say they fight here in Colorado, you can't throw elbows as an amateur, right? Fans don't know that, and they shout, "Go elbow, elbow!" And a fighter in the heat of the moment is going to listen and throw an elbow. But if a fighter's training in Colorado for a fight, and it's fighting in Nebraska, which is a state over, well, Nebraska allows elbows. So if they're not training for it, they're at a disadvantage, and vice versa. If the Nebraska fighter is training and Nebraskans come to Colorado to fight, and they've been training elbows all camp, they show up at fight night, and I'm giving the rules meeting. I'm like, there's no elbows. And they're like, oh, shoot, that was there went 30% of my game plan. So it's just not right. So I think that everybody should have the same rule set. I know it's difficult because of, just different things, but I believe that's what's best for the fighters. And it's not difficult necessarily to keep up with the commissions, just as long as you know the rules. There's got to be a reason for a commission to bring you in from out of state when they've got in-state people. So there's got to be a reason. And sometimes it's a promotions requesting you. And most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, commissions are very understanding of that, and they will try to make that work. It doesn't always work, but they do try to make it work for the promotion. And that's the reason why you see the same people on the UFCs and Bellators and, all those things, because they're very confident in those. And when you got a brand, you don't want the local guy messing it up for you, so to speak. I know that sounds terrible, but that's a reality.
No, and it's something you hear a lot at the UFC level as well.
Yeah.
And so I find that fascinating. And I mean, there's so much that I would love to ask you. And in the name of time, I can't ask you at all. So I think we should transition over to some of the experiences. I mean, what was maybe the craziest thing that you've seen in your experiences as a ref?
Man, there's so many. So I've done over 5,000 fights. Now, people say, oh, that's crazy in 12 and a half years. How is that even possible? Blah, blah, blah. You do a UFC card, you do 4 fights. How can you get to 5,000? Well, in the beginning, 12 and a half years ago, you would show up to do a card. You'd be the only ref, and there'd be 16 fights. It wasn't until, I don't know, maybe 9-10 years ago that they started doing 2 referees. But before that, every fight I did, it was 1 referee. However many fights there were, you did them. So it wasn't uncommon for me to do 60 to 80 fights a month back then. Now, almost everywhere, they assign 2 refs. And then like when we do the UFCs, they usually do 4 refs. So it's much different now. So as far as what the craziest thing, man, there are so many things. I've seen broken bones. I've seen chandelier fall in the cage on me. I've seen lights go out in the middle of a fight. I've seen someone jump over the cage to get in during the fight. I mean, there's just so many crazy things that you sit there and you're like, I didn't think I'd see that. And okay, now I have. And someday I'm going to write a book on everything. And like it's going to be a bestseller because there's so much stuff that the casual fan wouldn't even believe happens. So.
And I know from my own personal experiences working in the industry a little bit, some crazy stuff happens, but I only did about a year and a half. So I can only imagine what you've experienced in 12 and a half. And a chandelier in the cage. I mean,
So back in the day, and even some still now, I guess some smaller local shows would do them like at hotels, and they would be in like in the banquet hall or whatever. And right over the cage was a chandelier. And halfway through, it came down. So yeah,
and
not
did the
something you
card
plan on.
did the card continue after that?
Yeah, they cleaned it up because there was plenty of lights elsewhere. But there was like an hour delay.
I can only imagine with glass and the chaos that must have
Yeah.
caused.
And
Well,
of course, it was in the middle of a fight. And so the fight has to stop. And you don't restart a fight once you stop it. Like you can't say, hey, we're going to resume this in an hour because the fighters, have come up here and now they've dropped and back up. You can't do that to them. So obviously that fight got canceled and the card proceeded after that. But that stuff happens. And, everybody watches the UFC and thinks everything's the UFC, and it's not. You get to your local shows and crazy things happen. And you deal with promoters that aren't as morally or ethical as some others. And so wide variety of things happen, and it's been a part of the journey. So it's been awesome.
And the journey is the best part. And I mean, I know, like, when you say that you can't start a fight, like, the casual fan might think, why? And I've seen it myself. Like, these guys, they have such a crazy adrenaline dump. There was once a guy, he went in and he knocked the guy out. He's living his best life, taking pictures in the octagon, hugging his family on the way back. He gets back into the locker room. Guy's throwing up for who knows how long, just because the crazy adrenaline dump and
Yeah.
the amount of toll that they're putting on their body. And so for you, you're the third guy in the octagon. That cage door closes. And I feel like anybody who pays attention knows, there's so much nerves and adrenaline, all that stuff in the buildup. But from your perspective, one that nobody else has, what's really going on in that octagon before the fight?
Before the fight,
Yeah.
man, the fighters, I get a good read of the fighters. And if you ever watch a fight that I ref, I'm staring at the fighters because it is a good indicator of what could come out as soon as I say, let's get after it. But some fighters are very calm, and it's uneasy seeing them that calm, because you're like, I bet he's going to kill this guy. Like, if you're that calm in this situation, we got a problem. And then you got guys that come in and they're running around and they're talking shit and they're doing their thing. You're like, he's going to be out of energy in the first 90 seconds here, and you also see like records. So you'll look at, the fighters, they're 0-1 or 1-0 or whatever. Those, for the most part, not always, but for the most part, those fighters don't know how to deal with the adrenaline drop, because it's going to happen. And if you got a newer fighter as a ref, it's going to happen. Unless he goes out and knocks him out in 10 seconds, then it doesn't happen. But even in the UFC, the big fights, those guys experience it as well. Like, it's a real thing.
And you see it all the time. And I think these guys, when they go in there, there's so much excitement and there's so much pressure, self-implied, and just from the nature. I mean, so for you as a ref, have you seen anything from the crowd that stands out? Because I feel like, I know you said someone jumped over, but I feel like sometimes the crowd gets so into it, and that kind of can change how the fight goes.
Yeah, there's so in your bigger shows, you'll get a lot of fights in the crowds type of thing. That's kind of the extent, because like for the UFC, they've got very good security. So someone getting to the cage from the audience, not happening. Like, that's not happening. Now, can they get in a fight out there? Yep. And that's about the craziest thing you get. You get to these local shows where security is nowhere near that. I've had parents of fighters, dads, jump over the rail and try to get to the cage, and they're screaming, and you're like, holy shit, what's going on here? And then it happens more so after the fights. Like after the fight's over, I'll exit the cage and start walking back and get confronted by parents, drunk, because again, whenever I talk to fighters in the rules meeting, I'm very clear. I'm like, hey, half of you tonight are going to think I'm the greatest ref. Half of you are going to think I suck. Because the reality is whoever loses, it's the ref's fault. Like if they tap out, again, it's still the ref's fault. Like no matter what, the ref screwed them over type of thing, right? So, and that's the same thing with the fans. They're so emotionally invested in it. Their son goes out there and, they've got, especially the later the card goes. So you get to the co-main event, dad's drunk by then. And I've had many confrontations where I got to get security involved and have people removed. I've had bottles thrown in the cage when decisions are announced. I had a fight it was actually a boxing fight I did. And one guy was fouling on purpose. Like it was dirty fight. And it was the main event. And I, obviously stopped it, separated him, gave him a warning. It happened again. That time I turned and I was going to take a point before I could. People had rushed the ring, and there was probably 50, 60 people in the ring just punching each other and everything else. The ring ended up collapsing. That's probably one of the craziest ones. Like I was like, shit, like I'm in trouble here. I'm way outnumbered. And they weren't even after me. Like, I'm trying to keep order. The commission's in there trying to keep order. And it's like, oh man. And then you're at a point where, you just get out of there because your safety is important and nothing's good's coming of it. Let the cops handle it at that point. And the ring collapsed and it was like, oh my gosh, crazy.
Chaos. I mean, that literally is chaos.
And thank heavens it was the main event, because had it not been, like the fights would have been canceled because the ring was broke.
And there's no coming back from that.
Nope.
No, none at all. So we are running a little bit low on time. I've got 2 questions, and I want to make sure we have time for good, thorough answers. So the first one, and you just kind of briefly touched on it with, taking a point. And that's something that's very controversial in fights and something that you see Twitter wars about and all sorts of aftermath in the fights. So for you as a ref, like, how do you determine when is the right time to take a point and when is it not?
Okay. So to take on the taking of the points, number one is how egregious the foul is. So for instance, if I kick you in a cup and it just glances off, does it hurt? Yeah, it hurts. Was it intentional? No, wasn't intentional. You recover, we're good to go. If I full rear back and blast you in the cup and you drop, you are now compromised. So you're not the same fighter. Even if you're able to continue, you're not going to be the same fighter for the rest of the fight. So then it's my job to kind of make the playing field even again. So that's when you take the point, is to make the field even, or if someone's just egregiously fouling. So I hear a lot of people on eye pokes. That's the hot one. If I poke you in the eye and it just glances off the side and you're like, oh man, got me, whatever, we'll give you your time, make sure you're good to go, and we go. Now, if I go knuckle deep in your eye, now you're a compromised fighter. And now we got a different situation. So it's all about the number of times, I guess, because if it's the third nut shot, even if it's a glancing blow, it's your job to be in control of your weapons. I'm most likely taking a point. Whereas if you go one eye poke and it's knuckle deep, I'm probably taking a point. Like, I don't know that for a fact because it depends on the situation. But if you can't continue at the same level, I've got to level the field because it wasn't fair that you got compromised. So it really the frequency and the egregiousness. Now, there's certain fouls that I will take a point immediately. So if a fighter is against the cage and I go to double leg them, or you go to double leg them and pick them up and they grab the cage and then land on their feet, I'm taking a point immediately because they would have ended up on their ass. So, and I tell them that in the rules meeting. So there's no crazy, why did he do that? The fighters know. So that foul, I'm taking a point 100% of the time at all times. There will never not be a point. I actually did a fight in Florida for Titan FC. It was the main event. It was a title fight, 5th round. And there was like 11 seconds left. And the fighter went for a double leg and the guy grabbed the cage. I called time. He grabbed the cage and it stopped the takedown. I called time, took a point. Everybody lost their mind. The commentators, the fighters, the coaches. But in the back, I told them, if you do this, I'm going to do that. Now, if I don't do that when they do that, I lose 100% of my credibility.
100%.
So I took a point. It ended up being a draw because of that.
Wow.
But, you know, at the end of the day, that's not my problem. Like, you knew the rules. So hopefully that answered your question.
No, 100%. And that puts you in a really peculiar situation. And to balance that with so much, you know, at hand, at risk, I mean, that's just crazy to me. So we are running out of time. So my last question for you is, what would you tell a young referee?
I would tell a young referee, because I mentor a lot of them, listen, be coachable. Once you think you know everything, quit refereeing, because you never know everything. You can always learn from somebody. Be confident. You know, go with, don't second guess yourself. If you make a call, stand behind it. If you make a mistake, own it. But don't be timid and don't be scared to make a call or a decision, because if you do, again, you're going to lose the confidence of the fighters, and that word spreads quickly. So, you know, and again, I've made mistakes, own it. Hey, my bad, I messed up on this, go to the commission and get it fixed. That's all. But yeah, that's what I would tell a young ref.
That's awesome, man. And again, thank you so much for your time. We could go on for days, but make sure everybody that's out there watching, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, give us a shout on social media. Everything will be down below, but we're going to be signing off.